Drag queen harpies are celebrating world domination for the first time in human history. There is no denying that this day would someday come to pass, so here it is for all to see. Let the bells toll, may the parades begin, dance your jumbo-sized asses off, and those with strong appetites are encouraged to indulge by trying to eat their favorite foods before the harpies descend, to snatch the lovely fruits and roasted chicken legs right out from their trembling hands. Of course, the road to victory was a long one, and no self-respecting drag queen would deny that after so many centuries of blatant discrimination that many sacrifices have been made on their behalf. Promises have been broken again and again by those in charge, forcing drag queens to retreat to safer territory. Then, not until the right moment had been reached, when the designated hero heralded her torch, to lead the weary fugitives through the harsh desert lands into the oasis, where they could rest for a while, could the asylum seekers plan their next move. Once they were refreshed, a guerrilla campaign had been organized to take on their oppressors. Notwithstanding a potential sneak attack upon the harpies, the gallant drag queens knew they had to face the odds, and marched towards the capital to overtake the evil regime that had kept them sequestered for so long. This is how the history had been recorded about such sinister circumstances. Although the legions of drag queens had not been trained in the art of warfare, many of them stepped forward to take up deadly weapons to conquer their oppressors. Countless events subsided in their favor, according to various documents about the many toils they were forced to endure, while living out under such primitive conditions. This discomfort could not be avoided, and unfortunately, many would perish in the long quest for freedom. Broadly speaking, the proud and pretentious drag queens were out to subvert such a conservative society and decided that they must do so by going underground. That is why so many of them took jobs as teachers and civil servants, where it would be hard for them to be detected by the superintendents running the institutions where they were employed. Thus, it is easy to see why these kinds of precautions had to be taken at all costs. By staying below the radar, teams of drag queen harpies would stay in touch by various means. One such tactic was to meet in cells at secret locations where they could have weekly conversations about how they could calculate further damage on the authorities who suppressed them for so long. Of course, gathering like this was a very dangerous approach, but it was important that as a whole, the transgenders stayed in touch on a regular basis. No movement could make progress without the direct input of the chosen leaders. Too much was at stake not to adhere to this timeless protocol. Acres of wise accounts came out of nighttime meetings that were organized in this fashion. Incidental communications could begin again during the normal work week, the same as always. During the long struggles, there was always the ambition by the trans community to implement a drag queen story hour at every elementary school library across the land. By general consensus, the rising lifestyle was one revolutionaries wanted to make as a priority issue to be part of their political movement. Reading stories to kids was an integral part of their culture. So much pressure had been foisted upon their leaders to include this in their list of demands to state authorities. These in turn were taken to the table during the long peace negotiations. In the final outcome, mainstream society had come to accept the drag queens as harmless actors with hidden agendas, but the overall view implied there were no dangerous plots cooking under the surface, so the eventual incorporation of these outsiders into the greater society was ultimately given the green light. That ended the conflict between the sides once and for all, or so we had thought. Since our team has learned to live with the drag queens for so long in a peaceful manner, we never expected the unthinkable, that being this disparate group of she-males would rise up to unleash a conspiracy that would allow them world domination. It wasn't a complete surprise, however. In minor ways we could see it coming for a long time, beginning in the last century when tolerance for transgenders had increased dramatically, compared to the dark days of the past. Such a broadside hit us rather hard when the goal of taking over as much territory as possible became the desired outcome of these unusual people. Mastering the art of deception, drag queens learned to infiltrate the most important institutions of our countries, and demands were made for us to show sympathy for such persons, despite them having taken over such large swaths of territory, and becoming immensely wealthy while doing so. For so many of us, growing up in working-class families in which we had to struggle to afford enough food for us all, seeing the outright disdain for hard work by these drag queens left many of us feeling bitter towards them. But this kind of dissatisfaction was held in by us, because our leaders insisted we accept these newcomers with broad smiles and open hearts. One could imagine how so many of us were put under a strain of having to feed these hungry harpies essentially 3 meals every day. Otherwise they would just fly into our dining rooms and steal all the food we had laid out on the table, and soiling every corner in our households during the process. This was a fate we did not want to endure, so in the end we just complied with their demands, just to stay safe. In the longer view, it could be seen that the predicted breakdown of all of our traditions would be upon us, and sure enough, this ultimate annihilation had proved to be the case. Such unusual openly sexual behavior started to appear at every juncture. The drag queens wanted to perform wild nude dances at public places, and so many of us were appalled at this breach of trust. We should have known that this was the plan all along by these colorful entertainers. We could no longer trust them and began to assert our morals in the face of this extraordinary agenda that had welled up from the depths far below. This was a time to take important action against these feathered female impersonators. If we did not become more aggressive in the face of this terrible sloth, then by waiting too long might mean we would all be buried in the ground before we even reached middle age. That is why we began to organize our own version of freedom fighters and took up arms against these passionate invaders. After many incidents, we were finally able to put these harpies where they belonged. And the place chosen for them was far below, in underground caverns where they would rot for eternity. To what glee it was for us to know that these infernal thieves were being singed by a burning trident on a regular basis and buried up to their necks in baking sand, where their bodies would shrivel away into empty sacks of flesh. On the other hand, may we live our days as caring families till we reach ripe old age.